Thank you for coming to our ArtStop today here at the San Diego Museum of Art. Most of you have been on one of these before, but it's just a quick, about 10 minutes. We get you in and out to talk about one work that we have up on the walls right now. The very first thing I like to do is just contextualize where we are. So we're sitting here in Women, War, and Industry, exhibition that was put together by my former colleague Amy Galpin. And the show really looks at depictions of women from, let's say, World War I to the present and their contribution to home front industries, to wartime industries. I think what you have here is an incredibly diverse mix of artists, of viewpoints. But one thing I want to emphasize is we're gonna look at Catherine Opie, another woman artist who is represented in the exhibition, but something that Dr. Galpin was quick to point out is this is not a show of women artists. This is not about women artists. This is a show about depictions of women, and we have some great male artists represented as well, and I'll reference that in just one moment. But we're looking here at Catherine Opie. As you may have guessed from her name, a woman photographer, born in Sandusky, Ohio, like myself, is a Buckeye. She has been based since 2001 in Los Angeles, where she teaches. Graduated with her BFA from San Francisco, so she's actually been in California even longer, since the early 90s. And she has made work, yes, a lot about Los Angeles, but really all over the world. She is an international photographer, and as we will see, her subject matter covers a large scope as well, really an incredibly diverse body of work. We see her photograph here of this immigration march that is occurring in Los Angeles, and though there are scores of people around, really what you see here, the focus is this group of very strong women. And so as we will talk in the next few minutes, what is really great about Catherine's career that this photograph I think highlights is there's always this vacillation going on sort of between landscape and more figurative work. But it's actually not that much of a conflict. It's not that much of a tension. What I want us to think about when we look at the work of Catherine Opie is that she is a documentary photographer. So no matter what she's taking photographs of, we can not think of her as a landscape photographer or a portrait photographer, but as a documentary photographer. So let's talk about that body of work a little bit. Handouts, I have plenty of handouts. We all love handouts. And I really believe in them when we're giving these little talks, because we do just have one work here. And it's not necessarily emblematic of her entire series of projects she's done. So a lot of people do know her from her pictures of highways in Los Angeles. And the project with the freeways, I think she calls them, not highways, kind of came out of her love of new topographics. So what is new topographics? That's a term that gets thrown around a lot in the art world when we're talking about photography. New topographics was an exhibition, now infamous or famous, in 1975. New topographics, photographs of the man-altered landscape. And this is Robert Adams and one of his photographs of these trailers. Robert Adams is very famous, of course, for going out to parts of the West and documenting in 50s, 60s, 70s, this nation really engaged in urban sprawl, and the suburbs were really being built, and photographers like Robert Adams were documenting that. But this was also when sort of the banal photograph was coming out. The picture of two palm trees in front of an industrial building. And people were thinking, that's so banal. It's just so ordinary and plain. How can you take pictures of this and celebrate them? Right here, I'll just pass around this little thumbnail. This is Joe Deal, who was part of that new topographics exhibition, and his work is in our collection. Catherine Opie says, look back at that new topographics work. And think about it as an important historical document. If you go back to all the places that these photographs have been taken, Robert Adams documenting the cutting up of the landscape and the settling of the West in the modern era, they look completely different now. And we wouldn't have that history if these photographers hadn't gone out there and taken such pictures. But the other thing to look at is, can you look at these pictures and find a relationship of man's connection to an environment, how man is creating place. That's a very important point that we'll end on. Sort of how do individuals create place? How do they create space? This room that we're standing in, just as an example, is a very different space at 9 a.m. before this museum opens versus when we all get in here in the same time in the same place to have a conversation about art. So when we go into a space, we activate it, we change that space. And that's really what Catherine Opie has been looking at throughout her career. I think she's probably more famous for a couple series from the early 90s. One is Having, oh sorry, I'm going to mess that up, Being and Having. And another one is just called Portraits. All of her work, she says, is about community. It's all about community. So if she is all about communities of people that she's documenting in her photographs, how can she not be part of her own community? She is a gay woman, and she felt very strongly at a certain point that in her practice she needed to document the other gay women she was hanging out with. This is just one example from that series I was talking about. Here this is Catherine. She's wearing a mustache, and she took all these photographs of other gay women wearing these very, almost absurd mustaches. You know, you can see how they're glued on and everything like that. And she tells a wonderful story about how her and some of the other butch lesbians used to go to this lesbian bar. It was the only lesbian bar in LA that was open 7 days a week at the time, and they'd sit outside on their motorcycles. And she came from San Francisco. And there was a lot of culture there, or a lot of groups of women she could fit in with that were sort of these butch lesbian women. And when she went to LA, she found out that what she terms the lipstick lesbians were more the vogue, and the lesbians there were very, they had huge hair and beautiful makeup and great dresses. So they would sit outside this club on their motorcycles and wait for the other beautiful lesbians to come out and then try and get them to ride on their motorcycles. And she said, we never really got anyone to ride on our motorcycles, but we had a really fun time sitting out there with our huge fake mustaches on our motorcycles acting like butch men. And you know, where's that blurred line? That's what she was really trying to document in that series. The other thing when you look at that is that you notice is the bright background, that very intense yellow background. And a lot of these series, especially from the portrait series, have very vivid backgrounds. And she talks about her interest in painting. So here's a photographer talking about painting as a huge influence. I think many of us know this picture by Holbein called The Ambassadors, because it's important for so many reasons. And you have the distorted skull in the bottom here that gets talked about a lot. But she loves talking about Hans Holbein as her favorite painter, and that really one of the ways we know anything about the time of Henry VIII is because of painters like this and all the details that they put into their paintings. And especially you see this rich tapestry in the back here, and I'll pass this around. And you can see that in this portrait series, these very rich cloth tapestries that she uses that are very intense colors as the background. This is a self-portrait. This is one of her cutting series where she actually did have another artist cut this drawing that she made into her back. And this was right after her first very, very serious domestic relationship had just ended. She was heartbroken. She thought this was the woman she was going to be able to have a family with, finally, what she really wanted, and it didn't work out that way. So there's this picture, a very childish-looking picture, of a happy home and a couple here. And so she had that carved into her back and a photograph taken. Yes. And there's one, she did one on the front of her chest as well. You'll see a couple of those types of images. So she's making these very portrait-heavy type of series of works in the 90s. And like I said, I think that's when some people think of Catherine Opie, that's what they go to immediately. But I want to emphasize she is a documentary photographer that's just interested in communities of people. Why are these people all together? What is the glue that holds them together? So she's done these photographs that are just about football players. She's done the Boy Scouts of America. She goes and she finds, like I said, these interesting groups of people and really tries to dig into them a little bit more. She's done wrestlers, she's done a lot of high school athletes, but even in those photographs, she talks about these as football landscapes a lot of time. You know, some of them are the more close-up views, but here are these football players in this vast-looking landscape of the arena, of the stadium. This is another one I'll pass around. I just think it's appropriate for us here in San Diego, of surfers. She did a whole series of surfers. She went back near her hometown to Cleveland and did a whole series for the Cleveland Clinic of pictures of Lake Erie. She's done ice houses. People have their little fishing houses on top of the ice. In every instance, she's looking for some sort of relationship of people to a place. And another person she's very indebted to that I think is relevant for this conversation is Robert Mapplethorpe. Certainly not primarily, but someone I left out before in terms of her looking to other artists. I think Robert Mapplethorpe is as important to her possibly as someone like Hans Holbein. But again, in every case, no matter what the location is, and she's been all over to all kinds of locations. I mean, she bought an RV outright for the specific purpose of traveling around this country for 3 months and just making photographs. So she has been all over the place. But again, in every situation, it's about that community. To get back to this photograph right here and how it makes sense for this exhibition. Well, one, we have a work here that is not done in the studio. Right? I passed around some photographs that are very much set up in front of the rich tapestry, and she's got her lighting perfect, and she takes the ideal photograph. But she, when she goes out to the ice houses or the football field or something like that, she's often got this 8x10 camera, just absolutely huge camera. You know, it's bulky. It's not about turning around real fast and making the snapshot. It's about waiting for these moments to come, just sort of being very patient. And I think you see that in the surfers, you see that in the football, you'll see that in the ice houses. They're very slow. In contrast here, you have something that is sort of very, reacting to the moment, taking that shot as soon as it happens. Obviously, she's in the middle of this march. She's not anywhere near a studio. She's in the street. And so when we think about this work, as I said, in context of the rest of the show, it's interesting to consider some of the interactives that we've put in this exhibition. And I would encourage everyone to go catty-corner over to the room of black and white photographs. And there's a wonderful iPad application in which we've loaded all this content that are actual manuals that we found from World War II about how male bosses were to treat these new employees coming into their factories that happened to be women. And we didn't know what to do. I mean, they literally wrote handbooks. Here's how you're going to supervise women. Here's how you're going to deal with the influx of women coming into your factory. And I emphasize that because that was an example of a group of people, in this case women, coming into a place that already existed, these factories, and actually remaking the space, making it a new place. And when you look at this photograph, think of a place like the National Mall, or think of the town square, and think of what it is in some moments during a celebration versus some moments when there's a protest. That space can be very different. And so what we're looking at here is a space that might look totally different most days of the week, but here it's been activated by these people coming together to protest for immigration rights. And again, who does she frame out really in this photograph but this group of incredibly strong women who are part of this immigration march. The last thing that I want to highlight is, again, because she's out in the streets and she's not in the studio, and you have this sort of, like I said, almost snapshot photograph, you can think of this as bordering very close to photojournalism. And I think what is absolutely fantastic about the installation in this room is you have someone across from us like Stephanie Sinclair, and you have someone on the adjacent wall. Both of these photographers are photojournalists. They're not necessarily outright artists, but Stephanie's work has hung in museums in New York City. And so we have sort of this tension here about the photojournalist image versus the artist's image, and which one we consider, maybe to be more art or something like that. But here, Amy Galpin has really blurred that in a beautiful way. And so you can think of an artist like Catherine Opie, who's very much comfortable talking about herself as a photographer, almost performing this photojournalistic, or employing this photojournalistic strategy to make her art. So that's just a little bit about Catherine Opie, and I hope that it piques your interest and gets you to walk around the rest of this exhibition. Thank you so much for coming today, and enjoy your time at the San Diego Museum of Art. Thank you.